As we're looping through the content, we have an opportunity to rebuild and restructure the way that we're outputting the content. So that's what we're going to do in this lesson, where we're going to rebuild the object that we're outputting to the web user so that it's not going to be within a multi-dimensional array. It'll make more sense to what the values here are. So we've got all of the headers, and we also have all of the columns and information. So let's use a loop. So we can use a for each loop and loop through each one of the rows. And first, let's set up just a blank array. And this is going to be actually the array that we're going to be returning back. So instead of rows, it will return back the contents of holder. And then as we got the rows of data, and actually we need to use the questions, we can use for each and loop through each one of the values and also get the index value of it using the arrow format for functions. So this is new with AppScript, that you can use the ES6 and above JavaScript. So all of the JavaScript methods and all the JavaScript that you're familiar with, you can apply within Google Apps Script. So we're outputting the content. I'm going to comment out the log information. And then as we loop through each one of the elements, let's set up a temporary holder, and within this holder we're going to construct our object that we're going to place into the main holder array. So let's first select the temp, and we actually do have 4 headers, so we do have 4 rows, so we can loop through the value of headers. So actually let's do a for each for the headers, for each, and that's going to be the header information. And as we loop through, selecting the temp using the bracket notation, so it's going to output the header value, and then assigning it for the object with whatever the index value is for the item. And it's just going to fit index here as well. So as we're looping through, we've got for the element, we can select the current element of index. And because this is a multi-dimensional array, then we've got the second index as we're looping through the headers. So that's going to build out the more complex object. And as we set that up, we can then lastly take holder and push the object details into it. And I'm going to run through this again just so that we clarify. Let's first check to make sure that we've got the data object as the headers. So I can't read. So let's try by doing a log of the headers. And this is actually going to be the header information. And log of index, and this is how you can troubleshoot just to make sure that you do have the right details that you're adding into the array. So let's run that one more time. So let's see what happened. And within the logs, so the first output is the header, so that's correct. The second one is going to be the index value of 0, and then we've got the element. So the mistake was that I was selecting that index, and it should be header index like that. Because I was selecting thinking for the multi-dimensional array, but we've already got the array piece, the full array coming in L, which we can see here within the logs. So we need to just select the index value accordingly as we loop through the headers. Also for the header information, I want to update the header value. So take the header and then do a to. So using the to lowercase method is going to allow you to transform that string value to lowercase and then just equal it to the new value for header. And then let's move it up at the top before we're logging out the value of header so that we can see the new transformed value, and then run the code so that we can check the logs, the to lowercase, and convert the header to lowercase. So it does look like everything is good, and we can return back the holder output. Let's do a refresh of the dev. So now we've got the title, hello world, content. This is testing content, up, down. And we need to also add in one more item here into the temp, and that's going to be the row value. So the row is going to be whatever the index value is plus. So do a row property, and this is going to be the index value plus 2. And that's going to account for with arrays start at 0. So that's why we're adding 1, and we do have the header information. So that's why that comes out to plus 2 for the row value. And let's just make sure that we're outputting the row into the DevTools. So we've got the row 2, hello world 1. Let's check hello row 2, hello world 1. This is the content, testing, up, down, the values for up and down. So that's being output as JSON data, and so we're ready to work with that data and make use of it within the JavaScript application. So let's do a quick run through of what we covered in this lesson before we move on to the next lesson. So in the previous lesson, we got all of the values. We separate out the headers and the questions. Then we selected and created a blank holding array that we can deposit our newly reconstructed object into. We looped through all of the questions, so that's looping through all of the content there. And as we looped through, we picked it up as L for the value of it and the index value. And we created new temporary objects and set a default value for row to be equal to the index value plus 2. Then we looped through all of the headers. And this is why even if you add new headers here, it's going to add that into the formula. So if you were to add in test, and if these values were here, if I refresh it, it's going to be automatically added into the output. So there we've got the test 1, 2, 3, 4. So our array is, and our code is fully dynamic and flexible. If we update the sheet with new data, we're going to just add that new sheet data in. And also you can see that we've got the test, which was the header. So it's using the header information and converting it to lowercase so that we've got all lowercase object names and the property names. And then we're using the bracket notation within the object to select that object that we created and setting the property as whatever the value of the header is. So this is taking the first row information and setting it as the property name, and then we're assigning a value to it, and the value is going to be whatever was coming from the element, which is all of the row array data, and we're just using the index value, and the index value is represented here as we're looping through each one of the headers that we've got within the array. So that's reconstructing the object information and also adding in the row details, and of course you can add in any other details that you want. And finally, we're pushing the data into that holder array that we created. And lastly, we're taking that holder information and creating the output from it, so the data output, and that's just being stringified and then output into here, into the return of the web app. And when we look at the contents of the web app, we've got all of the contents within the data, we've got the status as true, and then within the data, we've got an array that we can loop through with JavaScript. And that's coming up next, where we're going to be connecting to that data. So once you've finalized it, do a new deployment. So we can select the app and we'll just call it data ready, and then who has access to anyone, execute as the current Google account, and then hit done. And it's going to reproduce it at the same web app URL that we have, and this is the executable URL that you're going to be using within your fetch request from JavaScript in order to connect to the data. So let's do a refresh on that, and just make sure that you've got the content within a JSON format and you're ready to move on to the next lesson.